everybody. This is Pathways Bible Reading with Brother Todd, and I'm glad you got to join with me a little bit today. Sorry about not getting any out in about the last 10 or 12 days. I don't know if some of y'all heard, but it got a little chilly around these parts, so we were pretty well tied up with trying to stay warm and keep going. But I'm going to jump back in here into John chapter 13. If you never have got to be part of Pathways, well, we just read the Bible together. We read it, and I talk about it a little bit, and we just kind of go through it, try to get a good handle on our Bible. We'll be reading, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but we'll probably be reading through 5 books to start with. John, here's our first one. We'll probably also cover the book of Revelation. We'll cover the book of Psalms and Genesis, and probably the book of Romans. I tell people that the first thing you need to do once you get saved is you need to get a good grasp on your Bible. And if you'll get those 5 books, I think, and I mean, I hadn't read that anywhere or anything, I just think if you can get a hold of those 5 books, you can get a really good start and a good go on the Bible and what God's got to say to us. Exodus probably roll in there pretty quick too, so that you get the histories down. But anyway, we're just reading through it. We got into John chapter 13, and they give me this little old contraption here. It holds my cell phone, and it moves all around and does all kinds of things, kind of like a little camera stick. I call it Steve the cameraman. And anyway, old Steve got to acting up pretty good, so excuse me. Hopefully we got him fixed, and if not, I'll jump out real quick. And we'll try to go from there. But we're in John chapter 13. It's the night before, or the night of Jesus being betrayed. This is it's Thursday evening, rolling into Friday. By the time he gets done with this evening, he will be being held in Caiaphas' house, underneath the house. A place, by the way, that is still there, right outside the. Caiaphas had 2 places. He was high priest. He had one outside the city and one in it, right outside, kind of not too far from the temple. And the ruins of that, the foundations and all are still there. And you can actually, it's one of the places in Israel where you can go and literally be in the very same spot that Christ was, and probably where he was held and that kind of thing. And you might hear the door grab every now and then. That's a little Karis, Amber, my admin's little one. During this COVID time, we've had her up here because she's too little to be around a bunch of people. And so she's got to where she's wandering about now, and she loves to get in Brother Todd's office if she can. So they got the door locked, but you may hear the door rattle a little bit. But I'm going to say one more thing before I get going, and that is they keep always on me about these things, about telling y'all to share them. Send them out. That is the number one way they get watched, is for you to share them, to forward them to your friends and people out there in the Facebook world and on the internet and things like that. Like them, give them a little thumbs up and all that kind of stuff. They say it all helps with the sending them out. They've been teasing me here lately that whenever I do a victory minute or a Bible reading where I'm outside, and especially if I'm around my cows and tractors for some reason. But if I'm around them cows, the number of people that watch them goes drastically up. Frankly, almost by about 1,000 people per video. And so they was teasing me the other day that I need to bring some of them cows in here and start doing my minutes. And I told them, I said, look, I'll sit here and hold a puppy if it'll get people to watch and like them and send them around. So y'all share these things around. Don't make Brother Todd sit here and hold a puppy and to go to such lengths to get you to watch. But I told myself, I'm starting to get my feelings hurt. I said, old cow's a better looking thing than I am. I feel like the old Yule log with the pig and the dog and the cats and everything. I used to think, if you ain't ever seen that at Christmas time, catch it on satellite sometime. Yeah, all it is a fire burning, and they'll have puppies and cats playing in front of it, kittens. I was laughing at them all for watching it one time, and I caught myself sitting there watching that thing one day for about 3 hours. I thought, boy, I tell you what, I'm slipping. But anyhow, I'm glad you're here. I'm going to get me a drink of coffee. We're going to jump in here. Chapter 13, Jesus is in the Last Supper. And John is telling us about something that we get a lot of detail in John on it, is that during this time, the Lord washed the disciples' feet. And last time, I know by looking here at the scriptures, I would have talked to you about how he was he was talking to Peter, and that he was telling him, you're clean, but your feet have to be washed. And it's a wonderful picture of a Christian in their life having to find forgiveness. You don't have to get saved again, but you have been in the world, and we need that continual washing. So I'll let you go back if you want to get more detail on that. Verse 12, it says, so we need, and I'm reading from the New King James, if you're following along. It says, so when he washed their feet and taken his garments, he sat down again and said to them, do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. He said, you're saying it right, because that's exactly what I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet, for I've given you an example that you should do as I've done to you. Most assuredly, and there's where, if you've got the old King James, it says, verily, verily, truly, truly. Okay? Whenever Jesus says that, the Greek words there are identical. He's trying to get you to recognize he is about to impart to you great truth. He said, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you, happy are you if you do them. And therein lies two things. I don't know if I touched on this before, so I'm gonna mention it now. Primarily in the evangelical church, there's two ordinances, two things that we always do. We baptize and we take the Lord's Supper. And people do that at different times, and there's not really a right and a wrong way of, like with the Lord's Supper, of how often you ought to take it. There's some groups that take it every week. Now some groups take it every week to stay saved. Now that's error, but some churches take it every week. Some take it every now and again. We tend to take ours on if we have a fifth Sunday. The Bible doesn't say how often take it. It just says as oft as you eat. Okay, do it in remembrance of Him. There's no right or wrong, and I think we probably don't take it enough. And so, but I try not to do it to where people get into. We just get into it's ritual, When we do Lord's Supper here, we dedicate everything we're doing in that service to the Lord's Supper. But anyway, everybody's got a way of doing it. Baptism is where you get in the water, and the Lord, like the Lord was baptized, you go into the water. Baptizo literally means to be immersed in water, completely covered in water, and it's a picture of death, burial, and resurrection. Now, some churches sprinkle, and some churches pour. I say that make sure your baptism occurred after you were saved, because that's the picture you always see in the New Testament. You don't get baptized to get saved. The physical act doesn't produce the spiritual change. The spiritual change leads to the physical acts. And you can get into all kinds of debates there. Some people think it's an expression of faith and those kinds of things. I believe you get saved and then you're baptized. But I'm going to tell you, be baptized now. It's the first step of obedience Jesus ever took. I tell people, they say, well, I've been saved 5-6 years. I haven't got around to getting baptized yet. Well, it's hard to call Jesus Master and Lord and not do the things that He says. In fact, He said, why call you me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say? And if the first thing He told us to do is to get baptized, then that's what you need to be about doing. He said, Brother Todd, I'm afraid of water and all this. Listen, if God can't give you courage to get into the water, then he sure ain't going to give you courage to get through stage 4 liver cancer. So you better deal with it, okay? Just say it. It's a real step of obedience. Now, in our world, of course, we get our name Baptist really comes from the term Anabaptist. He said, Brother Todd, we Baptist church? Yeah, that's what we are. We just go by Victory Church. The term Baptist, denominational titles tend to turn people off. But I want people to come to church and decide whether they don't like it. Not to see a sign and say, well, I don't go there because of this or that. Because, there's been a lot of sorriness done in all kinds of denominations. But they give us the name Baptist, being the Anabaptist, means rebaptizer. And because we rebaptized all the Catholics. And because people had infant baptism, that is not New Testament baptism. Now, your parents may have done that saying that they were going to raise you under the church in the Word and those kinds of things. But you check, God don't have grandchildren. God's got children. And you're going to make that decision to be saved, not yourself. Anyway, but one of the things our church has, even it's a requirement for membership in our church, is that you've been baptized the same way Jesus was. In the water, all the way down, soaking wet, whole 9 yards. it best conveys it. And in fact, if you go to a church that sprinkles and that kind of thing, if you'll look back at your leaders like Luther and the Wesley brothers and those kinds of things, if you're Methodist, they'll all concur that in the early church it was done by immersion. They baptized because there was much water there, not a little bit. Anyway, we'll see you in heaven if you got sprinkled. I ain't worried about that, but that's the way we do it. Be as much like Jesus as I can. But then there's a third ordinance in a lot of churches, and that's foot washing. Now, in our church, we don't hold it as an ordinance. A lot of churches don't. Some do. And you say, well, Brother Todd, why and this and that. It depends on the real interpretation of what Jesus meant when he said here, what I've done, I want y'all to do. And he either meant to be humble, and he meant to be servant leaders, which is the way we pretty much take it. And in some churches say, no, it's something that we ought to do. I've been part of foot washing services, and there's nothing wrong with it. And it's a beautiful thing. Again, it's one of those things that can't be I'm thinking about something. I'll probably tell you about it. But anyway, you don't want it ritualized, but it's a good thing. When my daughter married my son-in-law, Tyler, he didn't know it, but in the service, she wanted to wash his feet after they'd done their vows and everything. She wanted to show him that she was willing to follow him, be humble, and those kinds of things. And she wanted to show her love and devotion for him. And of course, it was moving to her, but it's way more moving to him. I'll wash anybody's feet. I don't want nobody touching mine, and not just because they're ugly and whatnot. Probably need to clip my toenails, but the act of having that done is a very humbling thing. Again, I'm just pulling this off the top of my head. For years and years, centuries, the king or queen of England would, once a year, they would have 5 or 6, 7, 8 people that had really in the kingdom and in Great Britain had distinguished themselves as great Christians, as benevolent people, helpers of the poor, and those kinds of things. And the monarch would wash their feet once a year. And it was a picture of what Christ was saying here. He set the king, but he washed their feet. Then later, that fell out of favor, and they just give them a coin, and they're presented to them by the queen or king. And I think it probably lost a lot of its power, but I think it's still done. I didn't research it. It's been forever since I read that. But anyway, so but it is a picture, and that's one of the things that Christ was conveying to us is the principle of servant leadership. It is a paradox that in the church, that's how we lead. We lead and follow based on family relationships and humility. We live by dying, okay? We lead by serving. Those of you that I know I've got a number of pastors and different young preachers that watch these things. They tell me, and I get messages from y'all sometimes. Never think too much of yourself. Always take the low seat. Jesus said, "You take the low seat, and if they want to elevate you, they will. But that way, you don't take the high seat. You don't be presumptive." And I tend to, when I have company over at my house, I don't sit at the head of the table most of the time. And I'll just kind of scooch over there to the side somewhere, even in my own house. And I'll ask one of them. I'll say, "Hey, brother, sit here," because where I normally sit. I'll say, "Here, sit here." And invariably, of course, a lot of these guys are people we run with and are in our church and stuff. And them men will all stand up. None of them will sit down until I ask them, "You sit here, and will you sit here?" Because they will not exalt themselves. And it's little things like that, especially in pastoring. You could know everything in the world. And yes, you do have a great amount of authority in Christ. Now, we live in a world today where the pastorate is not as respected as it used to be. And I'll just say this, and if you go to another church, and you ain't going to come in here and do it, but you got a pastor, you honor your pastor, you help your pastor. He sits in Christ's seat, as it were, as a shepherd. He's an under shepherd, and he's sitting there. I always tell people, treat your pastor the way if the Apostle Peter or Paul or one of those guys walked into your church, how would you treat them? Because that's what those guys are doing. They watch for your souls, okay? And but be humble. Be humble. Christ was humble. He had all the power in the world, but he was so humble. That humility draws people. You can't fake it. You can't fake it. If you got a pride problem, then you're going to have issues your whole ministry. You are going to speak when you ought to be silent. You're going to try to be seen when you ought to be hidden. And the worst thing preachers do is they go to try to be seen because God's called you, so you know you got this voice. It's got to go out, right? And you haven't hidden yourself. You have to be hidden before you can be shown. Jesus was hidden for 30 years, for 3 years of ministry. John the Baptist was hidden for 30 years, for 6 months of ministry. David was hidden with the sheep before he was killing giants and armies. Moses was hidden out with sheep for 40 years before he led the children of Israel for 40 years. You seeing it? You see, you have to listen. You have to be hidden before you can be shown. And I'll tell you something else. Since I'm talking about it, we're not reading our Bible. What's I going to say? God will show you when he's ready to show you. Now, you be faithful. You speak when you get an opportunity. Don't make much of yourself. Make much of the Word. Make much of Jesus. But God will elevate you when he's ready to. Okay? You might say, well, it's been years. Well, Paul was hidden in Arabia 3 years. Okay? So let another exalt you. Heard a great preacher one time say, go to these Bible conferences, and all these preachers are out there passing their cards around each other. You ought to have me come preach. You ought to have me come preach. I'm going to tell you something. Never met a God-called man needed a card. I heard that old man say that, and I said, you know what? He's dead right. And to this day, I don't carry cards. Never have. Never have. They got them on my phone number. People come in, they give them to them, whatever. I have the staff carry them, and they'll give them to them, this and that. You get a phone number from me, I got to write it down for you. I don't carry a card. I think it's the most presumptive thing in the world. Here, let me go preach for you. All that kind of nonsense. What makes you think anybody ought to hear you? Amen? Be humble. Stay humble. Get humble. All right? The more you learn, the more you know. If you're really learning, the more you know don't know a cotton-picking thing. I know a whole lot less now than I did 30 years ago when I started this. Just saying. All right, now we're going back to Bible reading. Everybody's like, Brett, I wish you quit talking to these preachers. I ain't no preacher. Well, y'all got to give me a little grace. All right. So he says, I don't speak, verse 18, concerning all of you, for I know who I've chosen. But that the scripture may be fulfilled, he who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. This is talking about the betrayer. Now I tell you before it comes, when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am. The word he is added by the translator. See it there in italics. And I say this all the time about every time. We got people learning to read their Bible. When you see a word in italics, it's not there in the original language. It's added by the English translators so that it kind of helps make things flow in our language. And one of the places you get is this emphasis on I am. Jesus uses that a lot because remember that's tied to Moses and the burning bush. Most assuredly, here he goes again, truly, truly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. Whoever receives who I send, he's talking about his apostles, he's talking about his preachers, receives the Lord. That's how the Lord views it. When you help the ministry of the word go forth, Jesus says you're helping me, and therefore you're helping the Father. And I'm going to tell you something. God ain't going to be out-helped, and God ain't going to be out-given. So when Jesus had said these things, he was troubled in spirit. Y'all do a study sometime every time it talks about Jesus being troubled in spirit. And testified and said, most assuredly, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. Then the disciples looked at one another, perplexed about whom he spoke. They even asked, is it me? Is it me? Now, John tells us that there was leaning on Jesus' bosom, upon his chest, one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. Now, we've been reading the book of John, but I know I've been sporadic in getting it out to you. So if you're new to it, John, when he writes, never mentions himself by name. He will talk about himself, but always with some application or another. And one of his favorites is to say to the disciple who Jesus loved. And he knew he had a good relationship with the Lord. He knew the Lord loved him. John was, I think, now I'm just telling you what I think from my studies. I think John was probably the youngest of the disciples. I think he was probably still in his teens. James was older, I think. But he was probably in his mid to late teens. And you know, as the young one in the group, he probably got a little special attention from the Lord. Now, also, you know, him and his brother, they were the sons of thunder, Jesus called them. One of them was going to be the first of the apostles martyred. The other one was going to be the one that lived the longest. In fact, he's the only one that didn't die a martyr's death from what we know of church tradition. And lived to be a great age. And they remember Jesus talked about the baptism that I'm baptized with. And there goes the witness, the way we live life. James testified of the Lord all the way to the martyr's blade. And John testified of Jesus all the way into old age and through old age. One was the ultimate act of evangelism, being martyred. The other ultimate act of evangelism, that's faithfulness. If it's real, you stick with it. And that was John. So when John talks here about the one leaning on his chest, whom Jesus loved, that's John. If you remember, I talked about this earlier deal. The Lord's Supper, the table set up, is not like, most likely, under the way the Jews did the Passover supper, was not like Leonardo da Vinci's painting, where Jesus is in the middle and it spreads out. Jesus probably sitting down around kind of close to the bottom, as if you're looking at a rectangle going this way, kind of the bottom, probably about second from the bottom. If that table was standing up in a room, he'd be on the left, one position up. Right to his left would have been Judas, and to the right of him would have been John. And probably right across from John on the table in the other corner was Peter. They're kind of down on the end. And Judas was actually in the most favored position. And from what scholars think, okay, I'm just telling you what I think, what I've decided in my studies. Anyhow, so Jesus talking about being betrayed, and it's going around the room. You see it from the synoptic writers. They're asking, is it me? Is it me? They're looking at Jesus. Is it me? They're looking at each other, you know, right? I mean, could you imagine? One of you is going to betray me. I've been following this guy for 3 years. No, I'll tell you this too. And nobody said, I bet it's Judas. Judas looked the part. Don't you be somebody in church that looks the part and not know Jesus. But anyway. So John's laid up, that say they didn't sit in chairs and eat like we do. They would have been reclined. Okay, they reclined. In fact, they reclined on their left arm. And because naturally most people are right-handed. And they tended to lean on their left arm, kind of prop themselves up with their left arm, and they would recline and eat, their head towards the table and their feet kind of kicked off to the back. And John would have been as such, the way he talked about leaning on Jesus' chest, right? He was up on him. He was near to him, dear to him. Remember, he said, why was he so pulled up on him so tight? Well, remember, Jesus is talking about dying in 3 days and being betrayed and all of this. And, you know, they didn't want to see anything happen to Jesus. They loved Jesus. They not only loved him, they thought he was their king, right? And he was, but they thought he was going to set up that kingdom. I mean, they wanted to see this happen. And I don't know if John was a favorite. Okay, I'll put it that way. But, you know, even me, if I'm standing out with 10, 15 guys and we got a younger guy there, I'll always give that younger guy a lot more attention, you know. I want to build him up. I want to pull him up. I want him to get strong, you know. So it was probably that same type of relationship, older brother type relationship. So John's laying there and Peter motions to John, hey man, find him. Who is it? Right? It's not, a lot of this is not just being pronounced out loud, okay? So when it says Simon Peter therefore motioned to him, to ask him who he spoke. So he's doing just like me and you do. Right? And so John goes to ask him. Jesus answered, then leaning back. So you see he goes leaning back. So Peter motions, right? John probably raised up. What? Find out. So John leans back in there, and he asks him, Lord, who is it? And Jesus said, it's he whom I'll give the piece of bread when I've dipped it. Having dipped the bread in the cup, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. Now, so let me stop there. So you say, Brother Todd, why didn't the whole bunch of the disciples jump up and jump on Judas? Or why did they go, wow, it's you, right? I don't think they heard it. I think they were just like all of us sitting at a table. I mean, if we're all at a long table at a restaurant, I don't know what's going on down at the other end, right? They're all caught up in what Jesus has said. Peter gets him, hey man, who is it? I was right there on him. Lord, who is it? I don't know that he announced it. Jesus looks at him and said, whoever I give this bread to, I'm going to put in this cup, and that'll be him. Well, I don't know exactly when Jesus did it, but I'll guarantee old John's eyes was bugging. I bet old Peter was looking. And he dipped it. He puts it there. He gives it to Judas. Oh, so what does it say? It says, when he gave him the piece of bread, now catch this, Satan entered him. This man gets possessed. Let's put it this way, demonically possessed by Satan himself. Remember, Satan is not omnipresent. He's not like God in that he's omnipresent. You know, people say, well, the devil tempted me. I'll tell you something. Me and you, we ain't never been tempted by the devil itself. We may have been tempted by the evil spirits. They may be devils and imps and such as that the old devil's got assigned to us, but the devil is not he's not omnipresent. So he's not everywhere at once. Okay? Now he might get word about what I'm saying pretty quick. But he got bigger fish to fry than Todd Peavy sitting in his little office in Scurry, Texas. He's after the Lord. And so here, Judas is not possessed by a demon. He's possessed by Satan. Here's a man that had an opportunity to be saved. Let's use that term. Heard everything Jesus said, saw everything Jesus did, but yet he was unchanged. And his heart was open. He's not owned, as it were, by the Lord. He's not saved by the Lord. He's left himself open to demonic influence, and that's exactly what he gets.